Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to continue on our discussion with the mental health issues in fiction. And what I'm going to do is build on our discussion on depression from last week. We're going to talk a little bit about suicide. Of course, not everyone with depression commits suicide, but you could almost argue that everyone who commits suicide has depression. And I'm also going to kind of little disclaimer. When I'm talking about suicide, I'm not talking about two groups. One group is the truly hopeless, so to speak, meaning that these are folks who have a life-ending illness. Someone's been diagnosed with advanced stomach cancer. They've got 6 months to live, and they're going to die a painful, ugly death, and they decide to end their life just to avoid that sort of situation. And also the sort of, I guess, heroic is probably another way to put it. Someone who gives their life for a greater good. A lot of Congressional Medal of Honor winners are it's awarded posthumously. They've engaged in some activity that led to their death, but because of that, some bigger goal was achieved. And that's not what we're talking about. Most of what I'm talking about is what I typically see in my office, which are people who feel hopeless, but they're not really hopeless. And I'm also not going to talk about the aftermath of suicide, because that's really more grief, and I'll talk a little bit about grief, I think, in another video, but that's a different sort of thing. What I want to do is kind of get into the mindset of someone who takes their own life and what they're kind of thinking. And, full disclosure, I've been suicidal before. When I was much younger, I was hospitalized because I literally I would spend all day and I could not think about anything else except when am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? Am I going to leave a note? Whatever. That was literally all that occupied my thoughts. And I think that's what leads a lot of people to doing it. So let me back up a little bit. Most people with depression, I won't say most, a lot of people with depression think about suicide at some stage. And it usually goes something like this, that they don't like how their life is going, and they just kind of get this vague idea of like, well, if I wasn't alive, I wouldn't have to worry about this. Or maybe I should just end it and get it over with. Maybe everybody would be better off if I was just gone, or whatever else. Very vague, very diffuse, and luckily for some of my clients, it's very alarming. That's what drives them into counseling, is they realize, oh, I'm thinking this way, I don't want to think this way, I need to do something different. I think most people who commit suicide, that's how it starts. And what it is they kind of like where I got, where they just don't think about anything else. They can't really get past that point, that piece of logic, which it kind of is. If you hate how your life is, well, if you weren't alive, you wouldn't have to live that way, right? And I think what gets a lot of people why they eventually commit suicide is they get this tunnel vision to where that's the only thing they can think of. And this is how I work with a lot of my clients who have suicidal ideation, is I put out there that, well, what your brain has done is it has come up with an option. That basically your brain is telling you, this is what depression is telling you, you don't like how your life is going. You don't like some aspect of your life, or maybe you don't like all aspects of your life, but for whatever reason, you don't like how your life is going. Maybe you hate your job, maybe you're in a dead-end relationship, or maybe you can't get in a relationship, maybe you feel like you have no friends, maybe you actually don't have any friends, I don't know, but what your brain is telling you is that it doesn't like how your life is going right now, and it's come up with this sort of logical, illogical, logical conclusion that, well, if you weren't alive, you wouldn't have to live this life anymore. And so that option is on the table. What we have to do is fill up the table with a bunch of other options. And I think this is the trap where some people get in that tunnel vision of suicide, is they don't fill up their table with other options. That still seems like the only reasonable option. And that's where my argument is, that comes in of, suicide is usually a permanent solution to a temporary problem but it doesn't feel temporary. It doesn't feel escapable. Remember, what depression does is it wants to tell you that your life sucks, your life has always sucked, and therefore your life will always suck. And so there's no point in trying to change anything. And that creates this hopeless, stuck feeling. And for some people, their only way to escape that is to end their own lives. And then what we have to do is point out, no, there's all sorts of other options out there. For a long time, I always used the joke of, semi-joke of, you can always just quit everything, move to Alaska, and work on a fishing boat. That's an option too. And if you don't like it, well, then you can quit that, and then you can move to Las Vegas, and you can be like a blackjack dealer. And if you don't like that, well, then you can move on and do something else. And the reason why it's kind of funny is because I eventually had a client who has an uncle who owns a fishing boat in Alaska. So it's like my joke was like legit, like a very legitimate option for him. But that's still at the core of it is that if you don't like how your life is going, ending it is one option, but there are a zillion other options, and the vast majority of those are not permanent. So you can try them, and if you don't like it, you do something else. And if you don't like that, you do something else. If you don't like that, you do something else. And you just kind of keep going through that, all the while recognizing that, yeah, ending my life is still sitting over here on the table, but I'm going to save that one for last. And, what helps is with my clients is inevitably they find something that's at least better than where they're at right now, and now suicide doesn't seem like such a strong option. Now they don't really want that, and hopefully if they keep the process going, they find a real reason to live. That the now it's like, yeah, I don't even think about that because why would I ever want to do that? That's where I'm at now. It's like I think maybe at the height of the pandemic when everything felt really bad and I felt really stuck for a variety of reasons, I think I kind of got those vague suicidal ideation ideas back, but it was very easy for me to push them away because by now I've had like 30 some odd years of dealing with them, so I kind of know how what they feel like and how to push them away. But if you're writing a character who is suicidal, then that's kind of the approach that you need to come at, is that it will seem, it should be, hopefully it seems illogical to you, the writer, and it hopefully will seem illogical to your readers as to why they are in this place that suicide feels like a real option. Because you can put other options in front of them, but if they don't see it, then it doesn't matter. They can totally have other options, and we all do have other options. We can do, your life is what you want to make of it. You can do anything you want. It sounds like a bullshit Hallmark kind of statement, but it's true. It's your life. You've only got this one. You're not beholden to anyone else. Go do whatever you think that actually might make you happy. Don't hurt other people in the process, but if you want to just quit your job and then run off to Alaska and work on a fishing boat, okay, why not? It sounds really hard and cold, but hey, maybe that's exactly what you want to do. Maybe that's exactly what would make you happy. So that's kind of how we have to approach it with the writing too, is a character, when we're writing them, has to feel like they have no other options in life. And then I think it makes for a really great story arc for them to realize something. And this is a common trope in a lot of stories, is that someone is suicidal and they're ready to go, and then something happens and they find a new reason to live. We also see these sort of redemption stories with substance abuse, that they find a reason to get sober, and then that changes things. Over Christmas break, I watched a movie with my dad that was basically that. I can't remember the name of the movie, but I can kind of picture. But it was basically that same sort of thing. And basically, a cowboy was drinking himself to death, and we later find out it was because his wife and son were killed in a car crash while he was driving because he fell asleep at the wheel, and now he was just drinking himself to death. And you could call it like a slow motion suicide, because he was just kind of going through the motions of living, but then he spent pretty much all his free time drinking, and then because of his drinking he would burn bridges with people and then was kind of having to force to move on. But yeah, similar situations with suicide is having a character who, for some reason, feels like they have no reason to live, and then finding that reason, finding something that changes their life to the point that they don't even consider that anymore. But yeah, I think that's probably the big parts. Is it's very painful way to live. It seems like an oversimplification, but from my experience, that's usually what it is people just don't feel like they can really do anything to make their lives better. And that one option just sits there and just kind of just keeps reminding them, oh yeah, you can do this, you can do this. And so we have to give them other reasons. This is a pretty big topic. The suicide rate has been going up, and particularly among young people, which is not how it used to be. Used to be we talked about suicide in the young, but really the highest rates were with, I believe, elderly white men had the highest suicide rates, and a lot of that was, I think, partly the feeling of desperation, but partly it was that sort of they were old, they were sick, they couldn't take care of themselves, they didn't want to be a burden on anyone else, and so they took their own lives. Now we're seeing a huge increase in teens and 20s, still mainly men. Suicide disproportionately affects men than women, I think like by 3 to 1 or something like that. And so one of the things that we need to do as a society is figure out what it is that's going on with young people who are in the prime of their life and decide to end their lives for some reason. That they are really at that point where they can go out and do almost anything, but instead they decide to just end their life. For a 25-year-old guy working on a fishing boat in Alaska is probably a really legitimate option. At my age, that's not going to happen. Even at 25, that wasn't going to happen. But for a lot of young people, they really do have their whole lives. They do have a lot more options than they think, but they feel kind of trapped. And I think there's a lot of other discussions on that. A lot of it's societal. I think social media and the news constantly grinds out all this bad news on all the ways in which the world sucks, and the world will always suck. I think really 24-hour news and a lot of social media are basically just depression generators. That's what they do, is they just keep cranking out negative news. And, young people are the ones who are most likely to engage in that. And then if no one is telling them, if no outside voice is telling them, this is all bullshit, you can go do a whole lot. People have suffered far worse adversity than anything we deal with in today's society, and they've gotten along just fine. And so I think when you're writing it, if you're going to be the most realistic, it would be a young adult novel, really, because it would be someone in their teens or 20s who's dealing with this and facing this. And then the story is basically, how do they overcome that? How do they see that they have more control over their life than they really think? At least have control over how they react to their life. That's kind of an old, I think it's William Glasser who said that we usually don't have control over what happens to us in our life, but we have complete control over how we react to it. And that's a big part of it, is that, yes, maybe, and that's why I say, I don't argue with a lot of my clients when they talk about how much their life sucks, because maybe their life really does suck. Maybe they make it worse than it really, or it seems worse than it really is. I don't know, but it doesn't matter because it's not my life. And so rather than argue with them on how great their life really is, I just point out that, well, you can choose to do something else. What do you want to do? Because I think it's also very interesting that almost everyone who commits suicide or who attempts suicide but doesn't complete it, they regret it. I've worked with multiple clients who've had past suicide attempts, and almost all of them have said, no, this is not something I'll ever do again, nothing I'll ever consider again, because they kind of got to see the aftermath, which when you got that tunnel vision, you don't really think about. And I think that's another aspect of people's suicidal ideation, is that, the people who survive think, oh, that was so selfish, why didn't he talk to me, why didn't he do X, Y, and Z? And the answer is simple: because they didn't think it would work. They either literally didn't think of it, or two, they just didn't really think it would work. Because remember, depression is telling them everything sucks, everything has always sucked, and everything will always suck. There's no point, give up, stop trying. And so even if they did think, oh, I should call my Aunt Gladys because she always made me feel better, depression is there saying, what's the point? She's not going to help. Your life is still going to suck. Don't bother calling her. And again, so depression is just taking those options off the table. And so that's kind of how you have to write these sort of characters, is that even the obvious answers don't really seem obvious to the character. And so that's part of that psychologically and emotionally trapped feeling. They're not really trapped, but they feel like they're trapped, and therefore they might as well be trapped. But anyway, I think eventually what I'll do is talk about grief, because that's another aspect that's sort of like the flip side of the people who survived that. But grief is also a lot more complicated than just dealing with someone who's died. There's a lot more going on to it. So anyway, yeah, let me know in the comments. What do you think? Is this a topic you would ever want to broach in writing? To be honest, I wouldn't. Mainly because this is what I do with as writing. So I want to write fantasy. I want to write just fun stuff, escapism stuff. But what do you think it would be like to write a character who has very strong suicidal ideation? And could you manage it? Could you do it? There's also a certain amount of therapy to this as well, as narrative therapy, of writing about someone who has the same problems as you, if you find yourself with depression and suicidal ideation, and then writing their solution to the problems, because that forces your brain to think about the solution to your problems, as by thinking about the solution to other people's problems. But anyway, I will talk to you later. Bye.